The slap reverberated through the crowded cafeteria like a gunshot. Grace Sullivan remained completely still, her left cheek a flaming red, yet her gaze was chillingly steady as she locked eyes with Preston Blackwood. Instead of bursting into tears or running away like every other victim before her, she glanced at her watch and whispered something that made Preston's smug expression waver. 3 more minutes, she said, her voice eerily calm. 3 more minutes and I'll have everything I need. 200 students were frozen in place, phones held high to record the unfolding drama. But none of them picked up Grace's subsequent whisper into the tiny microphone concealed in her collar. Phoenix to Cardinal. Target has taken the bait. Prepare for breach in T-10. Preston laughed mockingly, completely oblivious to the fact that in 10 minutes he would be the one shedding tears, and not just from physical pain. Before we delve deeper into this shocking narrative of concealed identities and sinister secrets lurking beneath the polished facade of an elite school, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. If stories of justice and unexpected twists keep you glued to your seat, drop a comment below, sharing your thoughts on bullying in schools, because what you're about to witness goes far beyond typical teenage cruelty. Your support helps us bring more of these impactful stories to light, and trust me, this one will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the quiet girl in the corner. Ridgemont Academy stood as Connecticut's most prestigious private school, where a staggering $90,000 in annual tuition bought a student much more than just an education. 3 weeks prior, Grace Sullivan had arrived as a transfer student on a full scholarship. Her fabricated backstory was airtight: parents killed in a tragic car accident, living with an elderly aunt, and maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA from a public school in Kansas. But every single detail was carefully constructed fiction. Preston Blackwood, an 18-year-old and heir to the Blackwood Industries empire, reigned over Ridgemont as if it were his personal kingdom, alongside his posse, the Elite Eight. These untouchable children of privilege operated above the law, their parents' immense wealth serving as an impenetrable shield against any form of accountability. Students whispered hushed stories about Preston's Friday night club, where extravagant parties took place in secluded mansions, the very same parties that Melissa Chen, Jennifer Park, and Ashley Rivera had attended before they mysteriously vanished without a trace. Grace had noticed a small but significant detail that morning. Preston was wearing a silver ring engraved with an unusual symbol, a serpent coiled around a key. The exact same symbol she discovered in Melissa Chen's room during her preliminary investigation, hidden inside a jewelry box beneath a collection of seemingly innocent friendship bracelets. Earlier that day in class, Grace had taken notes with a tactical titanium pen, definitely not standard student equipment. She'd strategically positioned herself in the far corner, her back against the wall, providing her with clear sightlines to both exits and every student in the room. Her sneakers showed a specific wear pattern at the heel, the kind developed through years of tactical running drills, not casual jogging. When Preston and his crew had cornered her in the hallway between second and third period, Grace hadn't flinched. Her breathing remained steady, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, a stress management technique taught to Special Forces operators. She silently counted their footsteps, mapping each person's position through sound alone. "Scholarship girl," Preston had sneered, his breath reeking of expensive coffee and unearned entitlement. "Heard you're from Kansas. Must be the first time you've seen real money." Grace had lowered her head, playing the perfect victim, but her fingers tapped against her thigh in a subtle pattern that anyone trained in Morse code would recognize. SOS. PB. Subjects on site. Preston Blackwood. Actually, Grace had said quietly, deliberately keeping her voice meek, Blackwood Industries has an interesting history. Company founded in 2003. But your tax records show a gap from 2019 to 2021, coincidentally matching the period when the first 3 girls disappeared from your previous school, right? Preston had frozen completely, his confident facade cracking for just a moment. This wasn't information any Kansas scholarship student should possess. "What did you just say?" His voice had turned ice-cold, all pretense of casual bullying evaporating. "Oh, I'm just working on my economics homework." Grace had backpedaled, clutching her books tighter. "I should go." But as she'd turned to leave, Preston had grabbed her wrist. In that brief moment of skin contact, she'd felt something telling. Calluses on his thumb and index finger. The specific kind that came from repeatedly using zip ties, the kind used to restrain people. Grace's phone had buzzed with a text from a blocked number. "Package confirmed. East Building basement. Need extraction ASAP." The 3 missing girls might still be alive, and they were somewhere on this very campus. Now, standing in the cafeteria after Preston's public assault, Grace watched him circle her like a predator who didn't realize he'd already become prey. The Elite 8 formed a loose perimeter, cutting off escape routes while ensuring maximum visibility for their leader's performance. Ryan, Preston's second-in-command, live-streamed everything on Instagram with the title, "Humiliating Kansas Girl." "Listen carefully, Kansas," Preston said loud enough for everyone to hear. "This school has its own laws, and the first law is knowing your place." "Interesting you mentioned laws," Grace replied, finally allowing steel to enter her voice. "Do you know what the federal sentence is for interstate kidnapping? 25 to life, especially when the victims are under 18. The words detonated like a bomb in the silent cafeteria. Ryan's phone shook in his hand, the live stream capturing his shocked expression. "Is she talking about—" "Shut up!" Preston roared, his face flushing crimson. But Grace wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds, Ryan's live stream cut out, replaced by screenshots of encrypted messages between Preston and an unknown contact. "New shipment, ready. Friday, usual pickup point." "How did you—" Preston lunged forward, snatching her phone, but the damage was done. Someone had already screen-recorded everything. Grace employed a military-grade security application on her device, not the typical apps teenagers downloaded from regular stores. This government-level encryption software enabled legally admissible audio recording with timestamp verification, blockchain data encryption, and forensic recovery capabilities that law enforcement agencies relied upon. Every threat, every assault was being documented in a format acceptable in federal court. The technology transformed an ordinary smartphone into a sophisticated investigation tool capable of penetrating civilian networks while maintaining chain of custody for evidence. Preston's frustration boiled over. He slammed his hand down on Grace's lunch tray, sending chocolate milk cascading across her clothes. The entire cafeteria held its breath, waiting for tears, for her to break like every other victim before her. Instead, Grace calmly checked her watch again. 1 minute and 30 seconds. 2 minutes until what? Preston snarled, trying to regain control of the situation. "Until my team moves in," Grace said, wiping milk from her face with unsettling composure. "You just assaulted a federal witness. Congratulations on adding another 5 years to your sentence." "You think you're what?" Preston grabbed Grace's collar, lifting her slightly off her feet. "FBI? CIA? You're just a pathetic charity case playing dress-up." "Close," Grace whispered, her breath steady despite the physical threat. "Multi-agency task force on human trafficking. And Preston, we already found the basement." The colour drained from Preston's face as if someone had pulled a plug. His hands trembled as he released her, taking an involuntary step backward. Around them, students began to murmur, phones capturing every second of his unravelling composure. Panicking, Preston drew his hand back to slap Grace again, putting his full weight behind the blow, but this time she caught his wrist in mid-air with a fluid motion that spoke of years of training, a subtle twist, a textbook close-quarters combat technique, and Preston dropped to one knee with a cry of pain that silenced the entire room. Melissa Chen, 16 years old, missing since September 12th. Grace said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. Jennifer Park, 17, disappeared September 25th. Ashley Rivera, 15, last seen October 8th. Should I continue, or would you prefer to start explaining where they are? Ryan fumbled for his phone with shaking hands, frantically dialing someone. Code red. The girl knows about the basement. Clean everything now. But his desperate call had just made things worse. Grace smiled coldly. That call just gave us 3 more phone locations. Thank you for your cooperation. She pressed a button on her phone. Fire alarms began shrieking throughout the building, but every trained ear could tell this wasn't a standard fire alarm pattern. This was something else entirely. T-minus 30 seconds, Grace announced calmly. I suggest everyone get on the floor now. Students scrambled for cover, some diving under tables while others pressed themselves against walls. Preston stood frozen, his world collapsing in real time as sirens grew louder outside. Not fire trucks, something far more serious. The cafeteria doors didn't open. They exploded inward with controlled force. SWAT officers poured through the breach, weapons drawn and voices commanding, "Everyone stay down! Hands where we can see them!" Through the tactical formation walked a man in an FBI vest, his expression grim and purposeful. Special Agent Director Mills surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency. "Agent Sullivan," he called out formally, "report your status." Grace stood slowly, reaching into her jacket to produce a badge that caught the fluorescent lights. Junior Agent Grace Sullivan, identification Delta 77, 3 primary targets confirmed on site. Primary suspect Preston Blackwood in custody, requesting immediate search of East Building basement. The revelation rippled through the crowd like an electric shock. The 17-year-old scholarship girl from Kansas was a federal agent. Their classmate, who'd sat quietly in the back of every class, who'd eaten alone every lunch period, who'd endured 3 weeks of escalating harassment without complaint, had been playing a role the entire time. "No, you don't understand," Preston screamed as officers secured his wrists with zip ties, the same kind Grace had detected calluses from on his hands. "It wasn't all me. I'm just... Just what?" Agent Mills stepped closer, his voice carrying the weight of authority that comes from decades of putting criminals behind bars. The recruiter, the scout. Tell us who you work for, and maybe the prosecutor considers cooperation. Before Preston could answer, the sound of running feet echoed from the east building, followed by urgent shouting over tactical radios. We found them. 3 females alive, but requiring immediate medical. We need paramedics at the east basement now. Grace turned to face Preston, whose bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by genuine terror. Human trafficking carries a minimum of 15 years federal time, but you're 18, Preston. That means you'll be tried as an adult unless you start talking about who really runs this operation. My father! Preston blurted out, tears streaming down his face. Richard Blackwood. He forced me into it. Said it was family business, that I had to prove myself worthy of inheriting the company. The confession sent shock waves through the cafeteria. Students gasped, some dropping their phones in shock. The untouchable Preston Blackwood, golden boy of Ridgemont Academy, was admitting to being part of a human trafficking ring run by his own father. Grace pulled up a holographic display on her phone, projecting it onto the cafeteria wall for everyone to see. The organizational chart showed connections between dozens of names, schools and businesses, with Richard Blackwood's photo at the center. Red lines connected him to 12 other private schools across the East Coast. 18 months of investigation, Grace explained, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of personal investment. Your father's network doesn't just operate here. Those parties you throw, they're hunting grounds. You identify vulnerable girls, isolated ones, scholarship students without strong family connections. Then you invite them to your Friday nightclub, where they're drugged and transported. Principal Henderson burst through the crowd, his face flushed with indignation. This is preposterous! Ridgemont Academy is one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. There must be some mistake. Grace turned slowly to face him. Principal Henderson, or should I call you by your real name, Kevin Matthews, the same Kevin Matthews who appears in our database as the East Coast coordinator for the Blackwood Trafficking Network. Henderson's face went from red to white in an instant. He spun on his heel, attempting to flee, but barely made it 3 steps before a SWAT officer brought him down with a precise tackle. The principal of Ridgemont Academy was dragged away in handcuffs, screaming about lawyers and lawsuits that would never materialize. The forensics team deployed their next-generation 3-dimensional crime scene scanner, a holographic technology that could recreate crime scenes in virtual space while simultaneously analyzing DNA traces and recovering deleted data from any electronic device within range. This cutting-edge equipment could detect the smallest biological traces and restore information thought permanently erased, connecting to global databases to identify victims and perpetrators across international borders. Within minutes, the basement's horrific purpose was being documented in excruciating detail, every surface catalogued, every piece of evidence preserved in digital perpetuity. Ryan, still holding his phone with trembling hands, suddenly shouted, "Container at the docks! Preston mentioned it last week. Container BWXU793. There might be more victims." Grace immediately relayed the information through her earpiece. "All units, we have a possible second location. Shipping container BWXU793 at Hartford Docks. Approach with extreme caution. Expect armed resistance." The sound of helicopters grew louder overhead, not news choppers, but black military-style aircraft bearing federal insignia. Parents began arriving in their luxury vehicles, expecting to collect their children from what they assumed was a simple fire drill. Instead, they found their offspring being sorted into witnesses and suspects by federal agents. Through the chaos, a black Bentley pulled up to the main entrance. Richard Blackwood stepped out, his $1,000 suit impeccable, his expression one of barely controlled rage. He strode toward the scene with the confidence of a man who'd never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. "This is outrageous," he bellowed, pointing at Agent Mills. "You have no right to terrorize these children. I'll have your badge for this. Do you have any idea who I am?" Mills smiled grimly. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, chairman of Ridgemont's board, and primary operator of an international human trafficking ring. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, kidnapping, and about 30 other federal charges that will ensure you never see daylight again. "Dad," Preston cried out from where he knelt in custody. "I told him everything. I'm sorry. I couldn't do it anymore." Richard Blackwood looked at his son with pure contempt. "You pathetic fool! You've destroyed everything our family built over generations." "Your family built nothing but misery," Grace interjected, stepping forward. "I've personally documented over 200 victims connected to your network over the past 5 years. Young girls whose only crime was being vulnerable, being poor, being alone." The paramedics emerged from the East Building, wheeling 3 gurneys. Melissa Chen, Jennifer Park, and Ashley Rivera, alive but clearly traumatized, their parents rushing to their sides with tears of relief and anguish. The sight broke through whatever remained of the student body's shock, and many began crying. Grace approached Melissa's gurney, gently taking her hand. "You're safe now. They'll never hurt you or anyone else again." Melissa's eyes, hollow from weeks of captivity, focused on Grace with difficulty. "There are others," she whispered hoarsely. "The container at the docks. At least 20 more. They ship them out every month. International buyers, please." Grace squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We're already heading there. Every single victim will be found. Every single perpetrator will pay. I promise you that." The entire Elite 8 was now in custody, each member's parents arriving to find their children being read their rights instead of being released. 17 staff members had been arrested, their involvement in the network varying from active participation to willful ignorance. Ridgemont Academy, the 100-year-old institution that had educated senators and CEOs, was being shut down, pending a complete federal investigation. Grace's phone buzzed with an update from the dock team. "Container secured, 23 victims recovered alive. Medical en route." She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of relief. 23 more families would get their children back. 23 more lives saved from unimaginable horror. Principal Henderson, from his position face down on the ground, suddenly started laughing maniacally. "You think you've won? You've only scratched the surface. Blackwood answers to someone else. The Hydra has 7 heads, and you've only cut off 1. Grace knelt beside him, her voice low and dangerous. "Then we'll cut off all 7, one by one, school by school, until every child is safe and every predator is in a cage where they belong." She stood and walked over to where Agent Mills was coordinating the massive operation. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted, Sullivan. I want to tell them the truth. All of it." Mills studied her for a moment, then nodded. "It's your story to tell." Grace turned to face the crowd of students, parents, and media that had gathered. She pulled out a photograph from her wallet, holding it up for everyone to see. A smiling girl, barely 16, wearing a Ridgemont Academy uniform. This is Emma Sullivan, my older sister. 2 years ago, she attended a Friday night party at Preston Blackwood's house. She was drugged, kidnapped, and sold to international traffickers. She managed to escape after 3 months of torture, but the trauma was too much. She took her own life 6 months later on what would have been her 18th birthday. The crowd fell completely silent. Even the officers paused in their duties to listen. I was 14 when I lost her, Grace continued. The FBI recruited me for this operation because I could pass for 17, because I had personal motivation, and because I'd already spent 3 years training in combat and investigation techniques, preparing for this moment. Every insult I endured, every moment I stayed silent while being harassed was worth it to see these monsters brought to justice. Richard Blackwood was being dragged toward a federal transport vehicle when he suddenly broke free, partially, shouting, "You'll regret this. The organization will come for you. You have no idea what you've started." Grace walked directly up to him, close enough that only he and the nearby officers could hear her response. Emma left a journal. She documented everything: names, dates, locations, even account numbers. Your organization, we've been dismantling it piece by piece for 2 years. You're just the first domino to fall publicly. By tomorrow morning, operations in 7 states will be raided simultaneously. Your entire network is finished. As Richard Blackwood was finally secured in the transport, Grace felt her phone vibrate with a text from an unknown number. "Impressive work, little wolf, but you only caught the tail. The head has 7 more. Watch your back, Hydra." A chill ran down her spine, but she didn't let it show. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of a black sedan with tinted windows parked just outside the school perimeter. The door opened slightly, and a figure she couldn't quite make out gestured for her to approach. Students were being released to their parents under strict instructions not to discuss the ongoing investigation. The media was being corralled behind barriers, their cameras capturing the unprecedented scene of one of America's most elite schools being treated as a crime scene. Grace noticed several students from her classes watching her with a mixture of awe and fear. She wasn't the quiet scholarship girl anymore. She was something else entirely. Agent Mills approached her one final time. "Outstanding work, Sullivan. But you know this isn't over." "I know," Grace replied, her eyes still on the mysterious sedan. "The 7 heads, each one probably running their own network. This could take years." "Are you prepared for that? You're still young. You could walk away now, go into witness protection, have a normal life." Grace touched the photo of her sister one more time before putting it away. Normal ended the day Emma disappeared. "I'll see this through to the end, no matter how long it takes." She walked toward the sedan, each step taking her further from the facade of teenage life and deeper into a war most people never knew existed. As she reached for the door handle, she turned back one last time to look at Ridgemont Academy. The prestigious institution where America's future leaders were groomed had been hiding monsters in plain sight. But today the monsters had learned that even they weren't untouchable. The figure in the sedan spoke with a digitally altered voice. "Agent Sullivan, 7 schools remain, 7 networks still operating. Your next assignment is ready. Are you prepared?" Grace slid into the vehicle without hesitation. As the sedan pulled away from Ridgemont Academy, she thought about the 3 girls they'd saved today, the 23 at the docks, and the countless others still trapped in similar nightmares. Preston Blackwood was in custody, crying like the child he really was. His father would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. The Elite Eight would face justice, but somewhere out there, 6 more heads of the Hydra were still operating, still hunting, still destroying lives. The sedan disappeared into the Connecticut afternoon, carrying Grace Sullivan toward her next mission. Behind them, Ridgemont Academy stood as a crime scene, its legacy forever tainted. In the cafeteria where it all began, Preston's blood still stained the floor where Grace had brought him to his knees. The powerful had fallen, the weak had risen, and justice had prevailed. But in the world of shadows, where Grace now operated, victory was always temporary. The hunt never ends. It just changes prey.